Hey everybody, let's get started today with torts. First off, apologies. I'm not wearing my typical uniform, and that's because it's dirty and I'm traveling, and I figured I better just get this out rather than try to go find a white shirt and tie. So don't judge me today. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up our lecture slides so that you can follow along. Again, I do recommend that you pull these up yourselves and we can kind of go through these together. But as you can see, today we're going to be talking about torts. This is a new word for most of you. You haven't come across the idea of torts before. It is as here. Let's run through some announcements real quick. Most of these you know. This Friday, so what is it going to be? Friday the 8th, I guess. Um, we will have a study session. It'll just be during our live Friday class. And that will get you ready for the exam that runs Friday through Saturday. So that'll be kind of exciting. Okay, so back to torts. Like I said, most of you don't know what this word means or haven't come across it. It's a weird word. It is French, or it has its basis in French, and it just means wrongs. So again, this is a cause of action that you have if you have been wronged. And again, it overlaps with criminal law because many torts are also crimes as well. So if somebody has stolen from you, well, they've committed the theft, or sorry, I should say the crime of larceny, but they've also committed the tort of theft from you. And there's all kinds of different words for different meanings of taking something of another. Let's not worry too much about that. Just know that, again, you can be to have two causes of action brought against you. One could be on the criminal side. That's where the state typically will bring a lawsuit against you for the wrong against the state, unless it's a federal crime, then against the country. And so if you steal my pen, to use the example that we used last class, and the state decides to bring a cause of action against you, then that lawsuit will be titled something like the state of Idaho versus John Smith. And you will have to defend yourself criminally. Now, it could be that, like O.J. Simpson, you get acquitted in the criminal trial. Well, if I believe and it seems probable that it was you that took my pen, I may then bring a civil claim against you using the tort of theft. And again, here, if you lose, you don't go to jail anymore, but you may have to pay me damages if I win. Okay, so that's the idea of torts. Again, correct the wrongs against individuals. All right, now this slide just briefly introduces the idea of damages in tort actions and other civil actions. And I'm kind of focusing on two right now. When we get to contracts, we'll talk about more, but really compensatory damages is by far the most important one. Compensatory damages just means that we want to put the victim of the tort back into the same position that he or she was in before the wrong was committed. Again, just we're going to compensate that person for their actual damages so that they are in the same place before the wrong was committed against them. Not in a better place, not in a worse, just get them to the place where they would have been if that wrong had not been committed. Okay, punitive damages, probably not worth speaking much about in Idaho because these are so rare. But sometimes if the wrong committed is repetitive, terrible, reprehensible, I think is the word that I use here in the slide, just extra bad, then we may say, you know, compensatory damages just aren't enough to make this defendant knock it off. So let's add on some extra damages to make sure that they don't do it again. Now, I say in Idaho, this is rare. In California, not so much. In California, you've probably heard of people winning multi-million-dollar judgments. That same thing just isn't very common in Idaho, especially compared to California. Okay, so big picture right now, we're going to focus on two torts, I should say, two classifications of torts today. The first being intentional torts. So that's what we'll start off and spend the majority of our time here talking about. And then we'll move into negligence. So intentional torts, much like the name implies, the person that committed the tort intended to do it. Okay. Whereas with negligence, they may have not intended to do that action, but their own carelessness, negligence, allowed a harm to be done. Okay, so let's put negligence aside for a little bit and come back to what you've got here on the slide right now, the idea of intentional torts. Now, a couple things that I hope you got in the reading, but I think it's very important to clarify right now. It doesn't mean that you intended the result. Okay, please understand this. The result isn't what we care about. It's just that you had the intent to commit the act that resulted in the damage. Okay, so let's jump down to this second sub-bullet point here where it says transferred intent. What this means is a kind of a common defense. Let's say that one tort is assault and battery. We'll talk about those in a second too. Battery is where you actually touch somebody. Assault is when you put them in fear of immediate contact, harmful contact. But battery is when you touch somebody, meaning a harmful touching. So if I punch you in the face, that is a battery. Why? Because, you got hit, right? So sometimes what happens is maybe you go to punch somebody and when you go to punch them, you miss. But the momentum of your swing carries you through and you end up hitting somebody else. Well, when you get sued for the tort of battery, do you think your defense could be, look, Judge, I didn't intend to punch Sally. I intended to punch John. Therefore, let me out of this. Well, the answer is no. And that's because even if the harmful touching ends up, or any intentional tort, ends up injuring somebody else, as long as you had the intent to start the process that resulted in battery towards somebody, well, just because you missed, we're not going to let you off the hook. We're going to say your intent transferred to the new victim. That's what transferred intent. Okay, so I think we're good with these first two sub-bullet points regarding intent. That first bullet point, don't get confused by that. It just means you knew that the end result would happen or could happen, not what exactly happened. Okay. All right. This second main bullet point here is also incredibly important. It doesn't matter if you had good intent or evil intent or neutral intent. None of that matters. So again, how to describe, I think I'll describe this more when we get to defamation in a little bit, especially with the news article that you read. So anyway, let's not worry too much about that, but just know you don't have to be a bad person to commit a tort. Okay. Now, the examples of the intentional torts, these are the most common intentional torts out there: assault and battery, which you now know, and false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. These two probably aren't worth going into too much detail, but you could Google the definition and the requirements of each of these torts if there is a question about them on the exam. So yeah, let's just skip over those and kind of jump to defamation. Now, defamation we'll talk about it a little bit more. But But again, this is just the idea that you published information about somebody that is incorrect, that hurts their reputation. Okay, so let's just kind of jump into some of these other slides, because I think they're important to make sure that you fully understand the idea of intentional torts. Um, there are plenty of these. So let's do an example here. All right, first example is we're going to slap somebody. All right, so you run up behind Julie. Say anybody in this class, you run up behind Julie and you slap her rear end while laughing. Well, when you do that, there's a number of possibilities of like what the result of that could be. Julie may, under this first sub bullet point, turn around and slap you back, right? And if that happens, well, has a tort been committed? Probably, right? Like Julie didn't like this. And one of the requirements of an assault is that it's harmful or unwanted touching. And clearly under this first one, this was unwanted touching. Julie didn't want you slapping her rear end. And as a result, she slapped you back. Now, can you sue her for assault and battery because she slapped you back? Well, probably not. It was a causation thing. You're the one that committed the tort first. This is where that, like, your mom wasn't always right when she said, like, I don't care who started it, and neither does the law. Well, that's not true. If you committed an assault on somebody, they're allowed to respond and still sue you. So again, Julie, under this first example, guess what? You may get sued for the tort of assault. Now, let's change things. Julie is an old friend. Julie is somebody you play volleyball with or baseball or whatever, right? And anyway, this is always kind of fun because my kids, when we go to sporting events and they see all the bum slapping, they're like, what is going on? And apparently they don't see enough of that. And maybe Julie is a teammate of yours and you slap her rear end, and as you have done every day for the last 3 years, that's a lot, that you have done 5 times a year for the last 3 years, and she just smiles and slaps you back. Okay, do we have a tort here? Clearly not. This wasn't harmful or offensive, as we can see by the facts and circumstances of this specific situation. So if Julie did try to bring a lawsuit against you for this one, your response is, Judge, we do this all the time. Here's some video of us doing it in our last game. All right, and then you prove, you negate one of the elements that Julie would have to prove to win a case of battery against you, and that's that it's offensive or unwanted or harmful, and you negate that by showing that you do it all the time. So it's not offensive. Okay, now that doesn't mean you win. I mean, Julie could introduce some evidence that 6 months ago she told you to stop and now she doesn't like it, and then she still wins. But again, you have to go through all of these hypotheticals in your mind. Okay, now let's kiss Julie. Okay, so you run out of class back when we had physical classes. You turn a corner and you run into Julie. You fall on top of her, and as you land on the ground, your lips briefly touch. You kiss Julie. Now, still a tort? Well, maybe. Well, you're thinking maybe, right? Because maybe this is unwanted or offensive touching. Julie doesn't want to kiss you, let's say. Well, you've met that element, but what's the problem? Yeah, think about this for a second. The problem is we're talking about intentional torts. Did you intend to do the action? In this case, no. Like, it was an accident. You were running in between class, and as a result you fell and landed on top of her and kissed her. Like, what are the odds of this? Extremely small. Now, I don't know that you necessarily absolutely win this case, because if you're running quickly through a crowded hall, is there a chance that you're going to fall and or hit somebody or have an accidental kiss? Well, it's possible if you're running quickly through a crowded hallway. And so the answer to this question may vary. If is it a crowded hallway? Should you have known better that another class was coming around this corner when you turned the corner super quickly? Or was it pretty much empty and nobody's ever in this building, and so the chances of this are extremely small? We're talking about intent. So and with intent, you have to look at, not only did you intend, like, because clearly you didn't intend to fall and kiss her, but if your actions, it's obvious that there's a high probability of something like this happening and you do it anyway, then maybe you're in that realm of intent. So anyway, it's an interesting, I want you kind of thinking about this. Um, now, let's jump down to the third one, because this is where you mess with my wife, right? So the third example on this slide is, you don't do so hot on your exam, so you're going to get me with a water gun, heaven forbid. So you wait outside my car, and when you and you don't see anything, but as soon as you hear the door open, you realize Brother Hales is there. You turn the corner and get out your super soaker and soak the person, horrified to realize it wasn't me, it was in fact my wife. Well, what tort was committed? Well, was there an offensive touching? Yes. Now, you didn't do it, like, your body didn't physically touch my wife's body, but you created an action that caused a harmful touching on my wife. We still call that battery. And could your defense be, well, I thought it was Brother Hale's, judge, I shouldn't be held accountable for this because I didn't know it was Sister Hale's? Well, that's, again, a horrible defense. Transferred intent will come fill in the gap there. And yes, you can be found that wrongfully committing assault and battery against my wife. Okay, it would have been me too if you'd done it to me. It's just worse because you screwed it up and got my wife wet instead. All right, so those are just a couple of these kind of fun examples to kind of get the thought process going about how this works. Okay, so now we get into the defamation case that you read. And what's interesting about this case is, I'll just do this very quickly. Like, you've got your elements of defamation right here. It's probably best just to, like, let's run through these. The D, by the way, D always stands for defendant. So again, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant made a false statement of fact as opposed to opinion. Now this is interesting. Like, the statement that the defendant makes, the defendant just means the person getting sued, plaintiff meaning the person that's doing the suing. So let's say that I say something about you. I say that my student, and I name you by name, is a thief, stole my pen. All right. Is that a false statement of fact? Well, it is if you didn't steal my pen. Okay. So we've got it already. We've got element number one right now, but let's change things. Let's say that I say to a class or another teacher, you know what, I think that student, meaning you, is dishonest. But that's just my opinion. Okay. Do I get out of the realm of defamation simply because I said, but that's just my opinion? Well, maybe, right? But usually, yes. So if I say, you know, this such and such student, I just think they're dishonest, lame, rude. Let's stick with that one. My student is rude, and I tell that to another teacher. Is that defamation? Well, probably not. Why? Because that's just an opinion. That's a judgment call about somebody. Whereas a statement of fact, something like, my student so-and-so is a thief, that's good enough. And now we're going to move on to element two here. Requirement two is that the statement was about the plaintiff, intended to harm the plaintiff's reputation. So if I say that you as a student, you are a thief, does that hurt or harm your reputation? Well, absolutely, assuming that you are an honest person and a relatively honest person, I would say. And now you've got a teacher, somebody in a position of authority claiming that you are a thief. Does that hurt your reputation? Absolutely. Now, three is important here. The statement has to be published. All right, this is a pretty low bar. This doesn't mean that it's required to be printed in the New York Times or even written at all. Published can just mean it's and this is what it does mean, that it's communicated to a third party. Okay, now let's think about this real quick. If I go around and I tell another teacher that you are a thief, have I published it to a third party? Yes, that teacher is a third party. The third party, by the way, means somebody that isn't you or me. We're parties number one and two. The third party is anybody else. Well, what if it's my kid? What if it's my wife? What if it's a blog post? What if it's a Facebook post? Anything on social media? Is that good enough? Yes. If it's while I'm alone in my shower, screaming that such and such is a thief, scream to the heavens or something, is that published to a third party? No, not unless somebody else hears it, of course. So again, that's where we are here with the published requirement. Again, it's just communicated to somebody else. What if it's you and I talking to each other and I say, dang it, you are such a thief. And I think it's just you and me that can hear this, but we're in a restaurant or something, having dinner, and the there's a group of people in the booth right next to us that hear what I say about you, and then they get on and then they start spreading it as well. Have I committed the tort of defamation? Yes, because somebody else heard, and it was reasonable to expect that somebody else would have heard that. Now, are they liable for defamation for putting it on social media? Probably not, as long as they're not saying it as their own opinion. If they're saying, just heard Brother Hales call James a thief, well, they're just relaying information, probably don't have to worry about defamation. All right, and then again, if the plaintiff is a public figure, then you have to prove actual malice, meaning that the person that published the defamatory statement, said the defamatory statement, knew that it was incorrect and stated it, published it regardless. That's why it's extremely difficult to prove that somebody knew something wasn't correct. Like, extremely difficult. Those cases hardly ever win. And then, now that you've kind of got the whole idea of defamation, let's jump back to something that we talked about at the beginning of class, and that is, does it matter? Like, do I have to want to hurt your reputation when I say the statement? And the answer to that is no, it doesn't matter. When I said that you're a thief, it doesn't matter that I still like you, or it also doesn't matter if I said it and I wanted this to ruin your life. None of that, like, my intent for the result of all of this doesn't matter. As long as I published something, as long as I said something to a third party that was incorrect and hurt your reputation, I'm guilty. My motives do not matter. Okay, so remember that for the exam. Anyway, this last quote from Charles Barkley I always thought was great. My initial response was to sue her for defamation of character, but then I realized that I had no character. And this goes to element number 2. If you claim that somebody is a dirty, rotten scoundrel and is always stealing from people, well, it could be defamation if it's incorrect. But if that person already has a reputation for being scum and a horrible person and not worth the trust of anybody, well, did you really hurt their reputation? And if you didn't, then it's not defamation, even though it meets all the other requirements. It's an interesting thing to think about there as well. All right. So let's talk about some intentional torts that businesses have to deal with. Kind of the big one here, and just the one on the slide, is something called wrongful interference with business relations. What this means is that two parties have a contract. Party A and Party B could be a product, a sales, a service contract, it doesn't matter. And along comes a third party that tells one of the individual or one of party A or B to breach the contract that they have with the other party in that existing contract already. Um, when that happens, the non-breaching party to that original agreement can sue that new third party that came in and incentivized or induced the original party to breach the contract with them. I'll give you an example, and it relates to this picture of Glenn Beck down on the bottom of the screen. There's this company called Timeshare Exit Team. And what they would do was they would go around and tell individuals who owned a timeshare to breach their contracts with the timeshare companies. Now, we haven't gone into too much detail about timeshares, but it's just the idea that you own a part of a resort, right? You share your time. That's where we get the word timeshare. Super clever, right? So if you can't afford a condo in Vail, Colorado, for example, or Park City, then you can buy 1 week of that condo, a 1/56th interest or whatever of that condo, and then you own it. And what happens is you buy it, and you get that condo. Instead of spending $500,000 on it, you'll spend $30,000, and then every year you get 1 week at that resort, right? And the problem with timeshares is that you have to pay a maintenance fee every year, whether you use it or not. This is kind of the reason that some people don't like timeshares. Um, and and along comes this company called Timeshare Exit Team, and lots of people were like desperate to get out of their timeshares, so they would use Timeshare Exit Team, and Timeshare Exit Team would first make people that wanted to use them pay a lot of money up front, and then they would tell um, many uh, of these timeshare owners, they'd say, just don't pay your maintenance fee next year. Um, that will help us to be able to get you out of your contract. And so people would stop paying that annual maintenance fee for their timeshare. And the timeshare company, let's just say it's a Marriott timeshare. Marriott timeshare would say like, hey, what, you missed your payment. What's going on? And these timeshare owners would say, well, Timeshare Exit Team told me to stop paying my maintenance fee with you. Well, what happened is a lot of the timeshare companies started suing this other company called Timeshare Exit Team for this very tort that we're talking about right now, interference. It's an interference claim. And I don't know where a lot of these have gone. I think they won some. I think Timeshare Exit Team may have won some others. But it's a classic example of interference with contracts. And so this is something you have to be aware of, because I've had numerous students who say that they go work in the summer doing sales, whether it's solar or home security or pest control or whatever. And oftentimes, just to get the sale, they'll tell individual homeowners, individuals that they want to sell to, by saying something like, look, I know you already have a contract with such and such company, but here, just breach that, just cancel that, and come with me. And that can get you in a lot of trouble for this very tort right here of interfering with somebody else's contract. Okay. This is actually interesting, and I think ties in really well, because some of you have probably seen the commercials from like Sprint or T-Mobile and some of these other companies that will say, you have a contract with Verizon, cancel that, or come with us and we'll pay your cancellation fee. The question is that interference? And the answer is usually no. Why? Because Verizon, the company that the customer is, in our example, considering canceling with, has a built-in mechanism to allow you to go. It's not just you breach, It's that if you want to cancel your contract with Verizon, well, there's a cancellation fee involved. And so that it's not a breach of contract. You're actually fulfilling the contract. You're saying, I'm canceling, but we agreed that if we canceled that I would pay this amount of money. Um, it's just built into the contract. So you can cancel. And Sprint or whoever is trying to get you to come sign with them, they're going to pick up that fee for you. And it's all just part of the contract. That's not interference. Does that make sense? Um, I'm asking questions to you, but if it doesn't make sense, leave a comment or shoot me an email and we'll talk about it some more on Friday. Non-competition agreements are another kind of business tort. We'll talk plenty about non-competition agreements later on in the class, but just know these are agreements that when you start working for somebody, that you sign a contract that says that if you ever leave that company, that you won't join a company that competes with the company that's hiring now, and that you would leave down the road. So again, this is a way to protect the company that is hiring you. They don't want to hire you, train you, and then put in all that work for you just to have you leave and go work for a competitor. You can see why they've got an interest in having you sign this non-competition agreement. But yeah, at the end of this class, you're not going to sign those agreements. So we'll talk about ways to deal with that. Okay, so that's the intentional torts. Let's leave that behind and let's move into negligence, what we call unintentional torts. Is the same thing. Negligence. Now, you've heard negligence all your life. You've thought sometimes like, oh, that person was negligent, or I wish I would stop being negligent. Okay, you probably never said any of those things, but you've seen drivers and you've thought that is a negligent driver and you didn't like that driver. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Here, what I want you to understand about negligence is that it's not an intentional tort. That sounds simple, but I need you to wrap your head around this. Let's go back to that example where you ran through the crowded hall and you landed on Julie, briefly touching her lips with your lips. All right. So, it may be an intentional tort, right? But I think that's a stretch. I think the more likely issue is that it's probably more negligence. So, not what this means is you probably didn't commit the intentional tort of battery, but you probably committed the tort of negligence. Why? Well, let's think about this. Let's use this example down at the bottom of this slide. Instead of running up to somebody in a subway station and punching them in the face, probably clearly an example of battery. Let's say that you run through the crowded subway station, swinging your arms wildly to get to your next subway, the next available car. And in doing so, as you bring your arm up, you hit somebody in the face. Now, you didn't mean to do it. The intent wasn't there to hit somebody, but you were acting like an idiot, like running through a crowded subway station, swinging your arms. What are the chances you're going to hit somebody? That's fairly high. And so, again, you may not have a claim for an intentional tort of battery, but you definitely, if you're the person that gets hit by that idiot, you definitely have a claim against that person for negligence. Why? There's a foreseeable risk. It's likely that if you are running through a crowded area with your hands swinging, you're going to hit somebody. Sue them for negligence. Okay, now, can you sue somebody for negligence and battery? Yes, you can do both. And the jury may decide, yes, this was battery, or no, it didn't quite meet the elements of battery, but it was definitely negligence, and award you damages accordingly. Just so you know, and this is probably obvious to you, if you sue somebody for battery, your damages are probably going to be higher. Why? Because they meant to hit you in the face. Whereas if you sue them for negligence, again, you can sue them for negligence. Your damages, meaning the amount of money that you get out of this, just probably won't be as high. Why? Because an intentional tort shows more willful intent, obviously, than just mere negligence. What does that mean? Well, in dollar terms, who knows? Like, it depends if you're in California or Idaho. But maybe if it's negligence, you're going to get compensatory damages for your jaw or whatever was injured, your medical bills. Whereas if it's an intentional tort, you may be able to add additional damages, not only for the medical bills, but add a little bit extra for their wrongful intent. They meant to do this. Okay. All right. Here I just list the elements of negligence. It's really just duty, breach, causation, and damages. We'll dig into each of these a little bit more. Here, let's kind of move on, because we'll come back to those elements of negligence in a second. But before we get too much into that, I think it's really important that we talk about defenses to negligence. Maybe it's me running through the crowded subway station and accidentally hits you or pushes you over or whatever. Well, maybe there are some defenses that I have to avoid being like 100% at fault. Assumption of risk is an interesting one. This is just that idea that, like, look, people run through subways. Once you go into a crowded subway station, you knew that there are people running to their trains. And so you put yourself in that situation, you assumed that risk of being hit by somebody running for their train. That may be a stretch, but this other one, like the example that I give here, I think is pretty interesting. Attending a baseball game. Well, many of you have been to a baseball game. It used to be the great American pastime. And I grew up going to Dodgers games. And when I went to a Dodgers game as a young kid, I went with one purpose in mind. I had my glove ready, and I would sit at the very top and last row, like a horrible section of Dodger Stadium with my mitt. Why? I was waiting for that foul ball to come up all the way to us in the cheap seats so that I could catch that ball. Now, it never happened because of where our tickets were, but you know what? I was ready just in case. But think about this. Is there a risk that you could get hit by a ball at a baseball game? Well, yeah, there is. And so for many years, people would go to baseball games and maybe they weren't paying attention to the game, which is like 90% of people in baseball games. And they're sitting eating their Dodger dog or that swirly ice cream that they do in the Dodger helmet thing. That's pretty good. And maybe they're just talking to somebody, and while they're doing that, a ball comes and hits them in the arm or hits them in the jaw or whatever and causes some injury. Well, you may try to sue the Dodgers team, what am I trying to say? The business, the company of the Dodgers, and sue them for the injury that you incurred while at the game. And oftentimes those cases were just dismissed. Why? Because Dodgers would respond to that lawsuit by filing a motion to dismiss, saying, Judge, Jessica knew when she went to the game that there was a chance that balls were going to come into the stadium where the people are. She assumed the risk that she was going to get hit. Okay, and again, is this an intentional tort? No. Nobody intended to hit anybody. They intended to hit the ball, out of the stadium, right? And so it was just dumb luck that the ball came and hit this one individual that wasn't paying attention. So it's probably a negligence issue. And again, the Dodgers, as a team, could probably avoid liability by saying, look, people knew balls go into the stadium all the time. It's what happens. They knew that. They assumed the risk. They were there anyway. We feel bad that they got injured, but they assumed the risk. We're not liable for it. And all of that worked pretty well up until about, I think it was like 3 years ago. A little girl got hit in the head, cracked her skull, caused some facial deformities as well, brain swelling, like horrific stuff. This like beautiful little girl just had her world just destroyed by one foul ball. And when that happened, it seemed almost heartless. I want to say this was Kansas City, but I can't remember what the team was. For them to say, sorry, that little girl assumed the risk. Well, of course, the little girl didn't assume the risk, but her parents did by bringing her to the game. But that seems kind of cruel to like put that up to the judge and say, sorry, we're not going to do anything about it. And so I think they settled out of court. But it brought up an interesting concern for baseball teams. Like people get injured, lots of people, hundreds of people get injured at baseball games across the country every year. How much of that is acceptable? Like, and before we used to say things like it's probably acceptable to understand and realize that 100 people are going to get injured every year, and that's like we're okay with that, right? And this has an interesting tie-in to right now with COVID-19. Like we know that people are going to die from COVID-19. How many people are we okay with dying? Right? And that's a horrible question. And that's a hard question. The same question is dealt with every year by states and federal governments when setting speed limits. We know that if we increase the speed limit from 75 to 85, we're going to have an extra 1,000 people die a year in the country. Are we okay with that? And lots of people say yes, the speed limit's too slow, it's affecting productivity. And in the name of just like getting commerce, getting people where they need to go, and this sounds wrong and terrible, but some people say, let's increase that speed limit, knowing that additional people will get injured. A car crash at 75 miles an hour won't be as severe as a car crash at 85 miles an hour. And yet, we're willing to sacrifice people. I mean, again, very difficult discussions and decisions to be made. And yet, if we wanted to like never have anybody die on the roads, well, the other end of the spectrum is let's just make the speed limit 25 miles an hour everywhere. And then we'll save thousands, tens of thousands of people a year. Well, some people would be willing to do that, and others wouldn't be. And that's a question I want you kind of thinking about. Like what would you do? And let's say that you're the manager, you're the owner of the LA Dodgers, and you know that a little girl just got hit, and you could probably get out of it, meaning avoid liability by saying that she, through her parents, assumed the risk by attending the game. But you'd rather not do that. You'd rather like not have injured people. Well, what do? Well, you could tell the baseball players, stop hitting it hard. That's not going to work. You lose every game. Well, you're the Dodgers, so you lose every game already. Just kidding. I know they've had a good couple of years. They just can't bring the title home. Anyway, whatever. This isn't a lecture about the Dodgers per se. So again, that option's out to tell your team to stop swinging hard. So what else can you do? Well, you do what a lot of the teams are doing right now. Those foul ball nets that they used to just cover like right behind home plate. And then when I was in high school, they went down a little further, and now they're like they're stretching way down, and you've got netting to protect the people watching the baseball games. And again, those started off small, and we've just seen over time they get bigger and wider, and they just keep stretching out. And that has been our solution to protect little kids. Anyway, interesting. You've seen this in other areas like play equipment. I just saw somebody tweeted a picture of like a playground in the 70s, and it's like jungle gym going up 30 feet or whatever. And now you see everything's soft plastic, low to the ground, wood chips down below that, or we got rid of wood chips because that could cause splinters, right? So now it's just like bits of old rubber tires or something. We've changed our risk tolerance. And as a result, kids nowadays have a much smaller risk of being injured at baseball games, at the playground, at anywhere. Geez. And that's because our risk tolerance just isn't what it used to be, or our knowledge of what we can do to avoid injuries has increased. It's another great discussion to think about. All right, so that's assumption of risk. Again, here, like if you go to Spain and you say, I'm going to run with the bulls this year, and you get gored by a bull, like right in your arm, let's say, all right, and like the horn sticking out the other side of your arm, and you're screaming, you're like, that's it, I'm suing this bull owner, or whatever you say. Well, you lose. Sorry, you jumped into that street to run with the bulls. You got gored, but you knew that was a possibility. It's part of the thrill of running with the bulls. You accepted that risk. All right, let's jump to the next defense here, and that's comparative negligence. So in this one, let's say let's use a car example. So let's stick with cars. You drive negligently. You're driving above the speed limit. And as you are driving above the speed limit, you're making a sharp right turn, and somebody is coming towards you, making a left turn from that other street, and you hit that person. All right, you get sued for negligence. And, well, things aren't looking very good for you based on what I've told you so far, right? And you will probably have to pay the damages of the person that you hit. Why? Because you were driving negligently. But let's change this a little bit. Let's say that that person that you hit was also speeding or was driving. Yeah, let's just say that person was negligent in some way. It could be that that person was speeding. It could be that that person was driving in the wrong lane, was driving in the lane that you turned into. Well, that makes that other party negligent. So the question is, like, how do you assess damages now? Well, this is the entire idea of comparative negligence. If two people are negligent, then one, we find out who was most negligent. So let's say that it's me that turned the corner and hit you. And the jury decides that I'm at fault. I'm the primary person at fault. I was 60, and then this is interesting. They'll divide up the numbers. So they could say, Brother Hales was 60% negligent, and you were 40% negligent. Okay, now we know the numbers. Now let's say that I caused $100,000 of damage to your car. You apparently drive a Bentley or something. All right, so if under this circumstance, what's going to happen is, normally, if I was 100% at fault, I would have to pay you $100,000 for the damage to your car as a result of my negligence. That just makes sense. But I wasn't 100% at fault here. You were 40% at fault. What does this mean? Well, again, I may not be an accounting major, but I'm pretty good at math here. And I'm going to have to pay you $60,000. Why? Because my negligence, my damages are going to be reduced by the percentage of at faultness that you had. And in this case, you had 40% of the fault. So again, using my incredible math, we're going to deduct $40,000 from the $100,000 that I would normally need to pay you because you were 40% at fault. That's comparative negligence. And that can be my defense to say, Judge, I shouldn't have to pay $100,000. So-and-so was at fault. All right. I think that makes sense. All right. So these are the two defenses that you can use when dealing with negligence and damages. Okay. Strict liability. I just have one question on the test with this. this is outside the realm of negligence. So I'm going to come back to negligence in a second. But strict liability is an interesting one. It's this idea that let's say you created a product that was faulty, a car seat. You created a car seat, manufactured it, marketed it, and sold it to the public. Okay. Turns out you weren't negligent. You did a lot of work. You made sure that according to everything that we knew, that you knew that this was a good car seat and was safe for children. Well, it turns out it wasn't. Why? Well, maybe the government changed regulations or something, or a new foam became available or something, right? Like, again, you're not negligent. You did a lot of research and development and came up with a product that was not negligent, right? But it's defective in some way, regardless. Is there an intentional tort? No. Is there negligent? No. Negligence? No. But we've got an injured kid, right? And for that reason, the government, I think this is mostly a government thing, and courts have decided, well, we could say that whoever buys a product is just, they assume all the risk for that product no matter what. They have to bear the cost of the faulty product. Again, not negligent faulty, but it's just has some defect for whatever reason. And we kind of as a society decided maybe that isn't best. Maybe we hold manufacturers in some cases strictly liable for the damages that they cause others, not through fault of negligence or intent. But maybe we just make, I'm trying to think of a brand that makes car seats. Car Seat Co. That's it. I just made up a name. All right. Maybe we, even though Car Seat Co. wasn't negligent, maybe we just make them be the ones that have to bear the cost of injuries in these different situations. One second, I've got some screaming kids. Okay, I'm not. I think they're gone. All right. Anyway, okay. So, and in that case, if it's default or if it's faulty, we're just gonna, or a defect, we're just gonna say the manufacturer has to bear that cost. And so again, Car Seat Co. created a defective car seat, not through negligence or whatever. I know I've said this 50 times, but they're going to have to pay for the damages to the kid. And that is, like I said, it's just easier for us to make them bear the cost than make the victims bear the cost, if that makes sense. So what does this mean? If you create a product, you're going to add an additional cost. So car seats, like this is so, like, if any of you have bought car seats, you know what I'm talking about. The like the material that they're made out of, all of that. Like it should cost you about $5 to buy a car seat. Well, why are they $80, $100, $120? Well, it may be because they're name brand or something, but the manufacturer has added a lot of cost to that because they know that they are strictly liable for any fault in that product, whether it's negligence or whatever. Like even in the absence of negligence, they're just going to have to pay that cost. All right, so that's the idea of strict liability. Just remember, there's no liability unless there's an injury. So if there's no injury, don't go looking for strict liability. That's on the exam. All right. Okay, let's jump back here. So, all right, so now we get back to the elements of negligence, and this is important, right? So remember, the first element of negligence is duty, meaning the defendant has to owe a duty to the plaintiff. The plaintiff, again, is the one that got injured anyway or suffered some damage, and so the defendant has to owe a duty to the plaintiff. Okay, now this first paragraph here on this slide is the most important. You and I, we all have a duty to exercise a reasonable amount of care in our dealings with others. This is the cost of living in a civilized society. It means that I can't go around doing anything that's going to increase the risk of you getting injured. Does that make sense? Like to live in a civilized society, it just means I can't create risk of injuring others unduly. Kind of, we could murky this water pretty quickly, but just know this: like, I can't do anything to injure my students at BYU Idaho. That would be negligent. Why? Because I have a duty to not injure you. That's my duty. Okay. We use what's called the reasonable standard person. Would a reasonable person not do that thing that you did in an effort to not injure that person? Again, you don't have to be the most cautious person in the world, and you don't have to be the most clumsy, idiotic, risky person in the world. You just have to be a reasonable, average person, like right there in the middle of society. That's where we put the line for this duty. Okay, so here, these bullet points are just a lot of things you can consider when talking about duty and the risk involved to other people. Okay, now there is a duty, like let's say that I own a business. I own Brolum's in Rexburg, Idaho. Do I have a duty to people that come to my business? You bet. I have a duty not to injure them. And this picture that you see on this slide here, this is a person that fell, and I have a duty to like make sure that that person doesn't fall in my store. Now, are some people going to fall in my store regardless? You bet. But I have to do my best to warn them of of dangers that they may not see. So again, I have to warn them of foreseeable risks like falling on the floor, right? Unless it's an obvious risk, like if there's a bunch of green goop on the ground and it's fluorescent and everybody can see it, do I have a duty to warn them of that? Well, probably not. Why? Because it's obvious. But what about just a wet floor? Most of the time you can't see that. And that's why Target and Walmart and Brolum's and every other store in America has these little yellow tripod things that you stick on the ground that say wet floor, because people can't see that often. But now you've warned them. So if they fall, you may avoid liability because you put the sign out, and if they fall, that's on them for not being careful. Okay. This Giorgio's Grill in Florida is kind of a fun one. During the day, Giorgio's was a restaurant, family restaurant. You'd go there, eat, leave. After like 9 p.m., it became this wild and crazy club. So people would show up, they'd dance on the tables and throw napkins up in the air. Well, the napkins would come down and land on the ground and trip people. And so obviously somebody tripped, that's why it's a case, and sued Giorgio's, saying, you should have warned me about napkins on the floor. Well, Giorgio's ended up winning this because they said, no, we didn't have to do that. You saw everybody throwing napkins in the air. Like, where do you think they went? They went on the floor, and they're going to make it slippery, and you fell. So again, we're not negligent. We didn't have that duty to warn you about a slippery floor because it was obvious. You saw what was going on. Okay, so just kind of an interesting case for you to kind of start to think about how this all really works in the real world. Okay, so yeah, you've got duty. You also have causation, meaning like if I'm negligent and you get injured, well, your injury has to be a result of my negligence. That's what causation means. Like my negligence caused your injury. All right, so here that there's kind of two questions really to ask: is there causation in fact? Meaning, kind of what we've already been talking about, like, did you get injured as a result of my actions? And then the second one deals with proximate cause. Super duper important. You may be injured because of what I did. But if it's too remote, meaning too many steps, this deals a lot with what we talked about when we talked about the Commerce Clause. Like if there's too many intervening steps before you then say, Commerce Clause. Well, the Supreme Court in Lopez said that's too much. And it's just as true here with negligence. So let me give you an example. This happened to me. Okay, so this is a personal example. When I was growing up, for our scout, we called it long term, just for our week-long camp out. We left LA, went all the way up to Washington State and did a 50-mile hike in the Washington the Olympic National Park. And while we were there, we had our camping stoves and gas, and I had no idea how to use these things. So I opened up the gas canister, and I didn't realize this, but it dropped a bunch of this gas on the ground. And then when I went to light the little oven thing, the ground just lit up on fire. I was lucky it didn't light me on fire. But it lit up the fire and it started to spread. Now, luckily, I was able to put this fire out using my friend's sleeping bag. And yeah, it screwed up the sleeping bag. But we put the fire out and everything was okay. But let's say that I didn't. Let's say that the fire burned and it went up a hill, right? Am I liable for that? Yeah, that's my negligence. And all of that is a result was caused, that damage, that injury was caused by my negligence. But let's say it goes up and over that hill, and that year was a super dry year, so it spread even faster, and it burned through, jumped a river, jumped a lake. Again, I'm just getting crazy here so you can see how kind of absurd this is. Finds its way to a chemical plant. The chemical plant explodes in historic fashion. I'm laughing just because this is dumb. It's not going to happen, and it hasn't happened. But chemicals are then blown up, land in the river, and kill every seagull and dolphin and seal in the Seattle area, out into the Pacific Ocean, where it then hit this devastation of all the salmon and dolphins leaving Washington State. They all attack a nuclear submarine that explodes, starts a nuclear war with North Korea. Am I personally is my negligence the proximate cause of all of that? Well, at some point we got to say no. Like Brother Hales is definitely liable for the injury and the damage to the national park and maybe up that hill and those trees, and it's reasonable that would have all burned down. But at some point this just became too crazy, too unbelievable to even understand, and so we're not going to hold me liable for the ensuing nuclear war or anything. Why? Because that's just too much. That's what proximate cause is all about. So proximate cause says you can be liable for all of the things that are every result that would reasonably happen as a result of the negligence, but not anything more. Okay, so anyway, that's all I want you to know about proximate cause. Okay, so again, once crazy things start happening, just say what's the natural consequence of what happened, and let's hold that negligent party liable for those things and nothing else. All right, so let's see. This is not opening back up. All right, so that's causation, and that's really it. So let me stop sharing real quick. So that's torts, everything that you need to know about torts. And again, just a reminder, I'll see you on Friday, where we will talk about the case, Theranos, great case, and get you ready for the exam as well. So I'll see you all then.